The morning broke with a silence too sharp to trust. Fog rolled off the Atlantic, curling between narrow streets and the clappered houses of Gray Harbor, a town that lived by its whispers. The tide pulled against the rocks, slow and deliberate, like it was holding something back. Jonah Crest stepped onto his porch with a mug of black coffee and a trash bag slung over his shoulder. His boots met the damp wood with a creak that echoed louder than it should have. He liked mornings like this, quiet, cold, predictable. After 20 years serving as a military medic in places the world forgot, he craved the ordinary. But ordinary died the moment he saw them. 3 figures waited at the edge of his gravel drive. 2 men in navy jackets trimmed with brass buttons and a woman standing between them, wrapped in a wool coat the color of old paper. She was Eleanor Vale, head of the town's Preservation Council. Her eyes were pale as winter glass. "Mr. Crest," she called, voice clipped, rehearsed. "You've ignored repeated summons. We're here to enforce compliance." Jonah set the mug on the porch rail. The steam vanished into fog. "Compliance with what?" The taller man stepped forward, coat snapping in the wind. "You've violated the heritage ordinance. Unauthorized alterations to a protected structure. Hosting non-residents. Failing to uphold community standards." Jonah tilted his head. "And who exactly appointed you as law?" Eleanor's lips pressed tight. "This council preserves the dignity of Gray Harbor. We cannot allow outsiders to erode what's sacred." Outsider. The word carried the chill of the sea. Jonah's hand tightened on the trash bag. "You're standing on private property." The shorter man, a broad-shouldered brute with a trimmed beard, unfolded a paper from his coat pocket, his voice quivering with false authority. "Notice of detainment until law enforcement arrives." Jonah almost laughed. "Detainment?" Neighbors' curtains stirred. Footsteps creaked across porches. The town was watching. He took a single step down the porch stairs, slow, deliberate. "You're trespassing. There is no law that grants you power here." Eleanor's eyes hardened. "We warned you. This home belongs to the town's history. You've disrespected it." "You mean I repainted the siding and fixed the roof," Jonah cut in. "Kept it from rotting into the sea." Her chin lifted. "You altered what was meant to remain untouched." Something deep in Jonah shifted, an old ache rising from places he'd buried. "You care more about paint than people," he said. "Tell me, Eleanor, how many veterans live in these historic homes?" The taller man took another step forward, boots scraping the stones. "Sir, come with us. Don't make this harder." Jonah's voice dropped, calm and heavy. "You really want to lay hands on me? In front of half the town?" The fog thickened. From across the street, a boy raised his phone, recording. Eleanor's gaze snapped toward him. "Put that down," she barked. The boy hesitated, eyes wide. Jonah moved slightly, placing himself between the boy and the enforcers. "He has every right," Jonah said softly. "Truth deserves witnesses." The shorter man shifted, uneasy. "Maybe we should wait for the sheriff." "No," Eleanor hissed. "This ends now." Her words sliced through the fog, summoning murmurs from porches. An old fisherman shouted, "What's this about?" "Heritage violation," someone whispered back. "He painted over the council colors." A woman clutched her robe tighter. "Looks more like harassment." Eleanor's voice rose. "Mr. Crest refuses to respect our laws. Gray Harbor was built on order. Without it, we lose everything." Jonah's eyes held hers, steady, unflinching. "Order built on fear isn't order. It's control." The taller man's jaw tightened. "Last warning." He reached into his jacket, pulled out a pair of tarnished cuffs. Gasps rippled through the fog. Jonah didn't flinch. "Those aren't sanctioned. You put them on me, that's assault." Eleanor's voice trembled but pressed on. "Do it. Show him no one stands above tradition. The man lunged. Jonah's movement was a blur, decades of training distilled into one effortless pivot. He caught the man's wrist, twisted, and in a heartbeat, the cuffs clicked shut around the attacker's own hands. The crowd erupted, shouts, gasps, disbelief. The boy's phone trembled as he whispered, "He flipped it. He flipped it on him." Jonah stood tall, steady, voice low but carrying. "No one's above the law. Not you, not her, not me." Eleanor's face blanched, fury cracking into fear. You assaulted him." "No," Jonah said. "I defended myself from an unlawful act, and you ordered it." The shorter man backed away, hands raised. "I want no part of this." "You already are part of it," Jonah said quietly. Silence settled, broken only by the tide. Then a distant wail, sirens, faint but growing, rolled through the mist. Eleanor froze, her breath shallow. "You called them?" Jonah didn't answer. He didn't have to. The taller man struggled in the cuffs, face red with panic. The boy's camera caught every second. Neighbors shifted, whispers turning to verdicts. "She's gone too far. Always thought she was untouchable." Look at him. He never raised his voice. Eleanor's certainty bled away with each word. Jonah exhaled slowly, eyes on the horizon where the fog began to break. For years, he'd lived invisible, content to fade into the background of a town that never saw him as one of its own. But invisibility had a cost, and today, someone else was going to pay it. Blue lights sliced through the mist. Eleanor's last defense was her voice, sharp but shaking. "You don't belong here, Jonah. You never did." Jonah looked at her, really looked. The fear behind the rage, the weakness inside the authority. "I belonged the moment I rebuilt what you abandoned," he said. "You just couldn't stand the sight of someone you couldn't control." The sirens grew louder. Somewhere deep inside her, Eleanor knew it was over. Jonah turned toward the flashing lights, the sound of doors opening, boots on gravel, and for the first time since he'd come to Gray Harbor, he didn't feel like the outsider. He felt like the reckoning. The fog shifted. The boy kept recording. And Eleanor's eyes, once sharp and certain, now searched Jonah's face for something she could no longer name. Respect. Fear. Recognition. Whatever it was, it came too late. The world held its breath as the officers stepped into view. The moment before, everything changed. The stillness before the break. Blue light cut through the fog like a blade. Two sheriff's cruisers rolled to a stop at the edge of Jonah Crest's gravel drive. Doors opened, boots struck the wet ground, and the silence of Gray Harbor broke beneath the weight of authority. Neighbors leaned over porch rails. Curtains shifted. The boy with the phone didn't lower it. Every lens, every breath waited to see how power would move now. Deputy Mara Keene stepped forward first. Tall, composed, her badge dulled by salt air, but her eyes sharp as stormlight. Behind her, Deputy Clark Rowan scanned the scene, hand resting near his holster. Mara's voice carried through the fog. "What's going on here?" Eleanor Vale found her footing first, though her voice cracked like ice. "These men were enforcing council orders. The resident refused. He attacked one of them." Mara's gaze shifted to Jonah, calm, assessing. "Sir?" Jonah didn't move. "They entered my property, tried to detain me under fake authority. One of them reached for me. I stopped him." The taller man still knelt in the gravel, wrists cuffed with his own restraint, breath fogging fast and shallow. The shorter one hovered by the mailbox, palms raised, face pale as driftwood. Clark crouched beside the restrained man, inspecting the cuffs, his brow furrowed. "These aren't standard issue." "No," Jonah said. "They're props." The crowd murmured, low waves against stone. Mara turned back to Eleanor. Ms. Vale, did you authorize these men to act as law enforcement? Eleanor straightened, drawing her coat close like armor. We act under the Heritage Council, the town's integrity. The council has no detainment powers, Mara cut in. Her tone was polite, but her eyes didn't blink. You know that. Eleanor faltered. We only meant to preserve order. He keeps ignoring regulations, hosting strangers, painting over historical trim. Mara's jaw tightened. That's a civil matter, not criminal. You crossed a line. The fog held its breath. Jonah's voice came soft, almost gentle. They wanted to make an example. Eleanor turned to him, desperation flickering behind fury. You think you're untouchable. You come here, change everything, refuse to blend in. This town has rules. Jonah looked past her to the sea, where the tide climbed the rocks like a slow confession. Maybe your rules were never meant for everyone. The words landed like a verdict. Mara glanced at the boy holding the phone. You record all this? He nodded, throat tight. Yes, ma'am. Keep it safe, she said. Clark hauled the restrained man to his feet. The cuffs clinked. You're under arrest for trespassing and impersonating an officer. The shorter one stepped back, shaking his head. I didn't touch him. I was told this was sanctioned. I didn't know. Then you'll give a statement, Clark said. Eleanor's voice cracked. This is absurd. You can't arrest them for protecting our heritage. Mara turned to her, calm as still water. And who protects the people, Ms. Vale? No one answered. The fog thinned, revealing the watching faces. Neighbors Jonah had greeted for months with nods and quiet waves. Now their eyes were wide, uncertain, questioning. Jonah met no one's gaze. His silence was heavier than accusation. A gull screamed overhead, a raw, tearing sound. Somewhere a door closed. Eleanor's composure shattered. You don't belong here, she shouted. You never did. But the words sounded smaller now, swallowed by the air. Mara stepped closer to Jonah. Do you want to press charges? Jonah studied the men, one trembling, one broken by his own arrogance. Then he looked at Eleanor, clutching her coat like a lifeline. I just want truth, he said. Let the law do the rest. Mara nodded. It will. Clark led the taller man toward the cruiser, the cuffs flashing in the blue lights. The shorter one followed quietly, head bowed. Eleanor stood alone in the gravel, the fog curling around her like judgment. Jonah picked up his mug from the porch rail. The coffee had gone cold. He took a slow breath, eyes drifting over the crowd. The old fisherman, the woman in her robe, the boy with the camera, all of them caught in the stillness after the storm. For the first time, he saw something new in their faces, not suspicion, not pity, something quieter, uneasy respect. But respect earned in conflict rarely came clean. Mara spoke softly. We'll need your statement downtown. Jonah nodded. I'll come by. She studied him a moment longer. You handled yourself well. He didn't answer. He just looked at the place where the fog met the sea. After the cruisers pulled away, the crowd began to scatter. Whispers trailed like seaweed. Did you see how calm he was? She ordered it, right in front of everyone. Maybe we were wrong about him. Eleanor stayed frozen, her authority leaking out like water through cracked stone. Jonah stepped past her, slow and steady. When he reached the gate, he paused. Preserving history isn't the same as repeating it, he said quietly. Her eyes flashed. You think this changes anything? It already has. He walked away, boots crunching the gravel, fog swallowing his shape until only the echo of his steps remained. At the end of the street, the sea wind met him head-on, cold and briny. He inhaled deeply, the scent of salt and iron stirring something old inside, a memory of deserts and tents, the weight of bloodied hands, the silence of lives saved and forgotten. Gray Harbor had wanted a ghost to haunt. Instead, it had awakened a witness. Back on the porch, the boy lingered, phone still warm in his hand. He replayed the footage, the moment Jonah twisted the cuffs, the stillness that followed, the truth catching fire in real time. He whispered to himself, "They'll all see now." From her porch, the woman in the robe watched Jonah's disappearing silhouette, eyes wet with something she couldn't name. Eleanor finally turned toward her house, but her key shook in the lock. Inside, the portraits of Gray Harbor's founders stared down with painted eyes, their silence heavier than judgment. Outside, the fog began to lift, and beneath it, a story spread, through whispers, through footage, through the restless pulse of a town forced to look at itself. The tide had turned, but tides, once shifted, rarely returned unchanged. Jonah reached the cliff's edge overlooking the harbor. The sea stretched endless and gray, a mirror for every truth buried too long. He dropped the cold coffee into the waves below and watched it vanish. The wind carried a single gull cry, sharp as a warning. Behind him, distant sirens faded. Ahead, the ocean waited, wide, unjudging, alive. Jonah's eyes narrowed. The fight wasn't over. It had only begun. Some reckonings come with noise. Others arrive quiet as fog. The fog cleared by noon, but the town stayed clouded. Gray Harbor carried its whispers like salt in the air, small, sharp, impossible to escape. By midday, the story had already slipped through every porch and pier. The outsider who stood his ground, the council head who overreached, the false law shattered in front of everyone. Jonah Crest sat alone in the back booth of the Docklight Diner, a chipped mug of coffee cooling untouched before him. The window beside his shoulder framed the harbor, gulls circling, waves gnawing at the rocks, fishermen hauling lines without looking toward the shore. He preferred the quiet here, but quiet didn't last. A shadow stretched across the table. Deputy Mara Keene slid into the seat across from him, her badge tucked under a windbreaker, her face unreadable. "Thought you'd want to know," she said, voice low. Both men confessed, said Eleanor pushed them, promised council protection. Jonah nodded, eyes still on the sea. "Doesn't surprise me." "She's doubling down," Mara continued. "Claims you provoked her, says you've been ignoring warnings, hosting strangers, disrupting harmony." A small smile flickered at the corner of Jonah's mouth, more weariness than amusement. "Harmony's easy when no one speaks." Mara studied him. "You've got history with silence, don't you?" He didn't answer. The diner's old clock ticked between them, steady as surf. Finally, she said, "Town's split. Some see you as a troublemaker. Others—" She hesitated. "They're starting to see what's really been happening." Jonah met her gaze at last. "Truth's slow, but it doesn't drown easy." The bell above the diner door rang. Heads turned. Eleanor Vale stepped inside, wrapped in composure like a brittle shell. The room stilled. Even the waitress froze mid-pour. Her eyes found Jonah's. No anger now, just a cold, wounded pride. "May I sit?" she asked. Mara started to rise, but Jonah gestured subtly. "Stay." Eleanor lowered herself into the seat beside the window, hands clasped tight in her lap. "I came to offer clarity," she began. Jonah's tone stayed level. "You came to defend what's breaking." Her jaw trembled. "You don't understand this town. Gray Harbor isn't just houses and ordinances. It's legacy. My grandfather built these streets. My father served on every council. We protect what we inherit." Jonah leaned forward, voice quiet but sharp. And what did you inherit that made you believe control is preservation? She flinched as though struck. Without rules, everything crumbles. Maybe it needs to, Jonah said. For a long moment, only the hiss of the coffee machine filled the silence. Mara broke it. Ms. Vale, the sheriff's office is investigating. Your statement's inconsistent. You might want counsel. Eleanor's composure fractured. You think I'm the villain? I was trying to protect this place. Jonah's eyes softened, though his voice did not. You were trying to protect an illusion, the kind that lets you decide who belongs. Her gaze fell. A tear slid down, caught in the glint of daylight, then vanished against her coat. She rose without a word and left the diner. The doorbell chimed like a final note. Mara exhaled. She's unraveling. She's waking, Jonah said. Sometimes they look the same. The deputy nodded slowly. You'll need to come by the station tomorrow for your official statement. I'll be there. When she left, Jonah remained, staring at the place Eleanor had sat. Her words clung to the air: inheritance, legacy, order. He understood them too well. Outside, the tide reached its highest mark. He left a few bills on the table and stepped into the wind. By evening, Gray Harbor's streets hummed with unease. Flyers for the Heritage Council's upcoming town meeting fluttered on lampposts, edges torn, ink running from damp, salt air. Someone had scrawled across one in red marker, "Justice doesn't wear brass." Jonah passed it without slowing. At the corner, the boy from that morning, Eli, waited beside his bike, phone in hand. "Mr. Crest," he called, pedaling closer. "The video's everywhere." People are talking. Some say you embarrassed her. Others say you saved the street. Jonah paused. What do you think? Eli shrugged, eyes wide. I think you didn't yell once, and they looked scared. Jonah gave a faint nod. Fear hides where truth hits hardest. The boy frowned. Are they going to try again? Jonah looked toward the council hall at the top of the hill, its windows glowing like watchful eyes. People who build their power on silence don't stop after one crack. Eli hesitated, then asked, Why don't you fight louder? Because noise fades, Jonah said. But quiet stays. The boy didn't fully understand, but he nodded anyway. He rode off, wheels whispering over wet stone. Jonah turned down the path toward the cliffs. The sea roared beneath, restless and old. He found the flat rock where he'd stood his first night in town, when the air smelled of kelp and new beginnings. Back then, he'd thought isolation could be peace. But peace without voice was only another kind of exile. He closed his eyes. The wind tugged at his coat, carrying the echo of a desert wind half a world away, where he'd once knelt beside broken bodies and whispered promises to the dying. I'll speak for you when you can't. Maybe that vow had followed him here. Behind him, footsteps crunched over gravel. He turned. It was Clark Rowan, hat in hand. Didn't mean to intrude, the deputy said. Just, folks are restless. Some council members want a closed meeting tomorrow. No public voices. Jonah's jaw set. Silence again. Clark shifted uneasily. Not everyone agrees with Eleanor, but she's still got sway. Be careful. Jonah nodded. Appreciate the warning. Clark hesitated, then asked, You ever think about leaving? Easier places than this. Jonah looked back to the sea. I've left too many places already. The deputy tipped his hat and walked off. Darkness fell slow over Gray Harbor, lanterns flickering to life one by one. From the docks came the faint clang of ropes, the sigh of sails, the heartbeat of a town caught between pride and reckoning. Jonah stayed until stars pierced the fogless sky. Below, waves crashed in relentless rhythm, truth pounding at the shore, refusing to retreat. He whispered into the wind, not sure if it was prayer or promise. They'll hear it soon. A gull soared past, its cry fading into night. Behind him, lights burned in the council hall, shadows pacing behind frosted glass. Plans were being drawn, lines redrawn. But Jonah Crest no longer moved like a man willing to disappear. The weight of silence was shifting, and the town would soon learn what happens when quiet breaks open. The tide pulled back, gathering strength. Something was coming, something neither legacy nor law could contain. The town hall loomed like a ship stranded on land, its wooden beams weathered, windows clouded with age. Lanterns burned behind frosted glass, casting silhouettes that moved like restless spirits. By morning, Gray Harbor hummed with rumor. Flyers for the council's emergency meeting flapped against doorframes. Some called it a hearing, others called it a trial. Jonah Crest walked the narrow lane toward the hall, the salt wind cutting through his coat. He'd slept little. The sea had roared against the cliffs all night, as though trying to speak the truths no one wanted to hear. At the base of the steps, Deputy Mara Keene waited. She looked more tired than usual, her badge catching the weak sunlight. "They moved the meeting up," she said quietly. "Council chambers, closed doors." Jonah studied her face. "You think they'll try to bury it?" "They'll try," Mara said, "but too many eyes are open now." They climbed the steps together. Inside, the hall smelled of salt, varnish, and old dust. Benches lined the walls, filled with townspeople who'd come despite the closed session sign on the door. No one was leaving. At the front table sat Eleanor Vale, her posture stiff, her voice low as she spoke to the other council members, 3 men and 1 woman, each shifting uneasily. Her face was drawn, the confident gleam gone, replaced by a brittle determination. When Jonah entered, the murmurs rose like wind through pine. Eleanor's eyes found him. A flash of something unreadable, resentment, fear, maybe regret. The council chair, a thin man named Gregory Shaw, banged a wooden gavel. "Mr. Crest," he said, voice echoing in the chamber, "this meeting concerns the preservation ordinances and your repeated violations." Jonah's voice was steady. "You mean my repairs?" "Your alterations," Gregory corrected. "Unapproved and against established standards." "Standards written before half these homes had plumbing," Jonah replied. A ripple of uneasy laughter ran through the benches. Eleanor's hand slammed the table. "Enough mockery. You came here knowing the rules. You can't just change them." Jonah's gaze held hers. Rules meant to preserve beauty aren't supposed to choke the living. Gregory leaned forward. "Mr. Crest, your conduct yesterday escalated an already tense situation." "We've had complaints," Jonah cut in softly, "from the same voices that sent imposters to my door." The room stilled. Mara stepped forward. "For the record, the sheriff's office confirmed the 2 men were not authorized by any agency. They were acting under Ms. Vale's direction." Eleanor's face drained of color. "I didn't—" "You did," Mara said gently. "They've both signed statements." Gasps rippled across the benches. Eleanor's breath hitched, her fingers clutching the table's edge. "I only wanted order." Jonah's tone softened, but his words cut deep. Order built on fear isn't order. It's silence dressed as safety. The chair cleared his throat. "Let's maintain decorum." But the dam had cracked. A fisherman rose from the benches. "He's right. We've been quiet too long. You fined my wife for planting lilies instead of hydrangeas." Another voice. "You banned my nephew from renting the old boathouse. Said outsiders ruin the view." The room swelled with stories, petty fines, unspoken prejudice, the slow suffocation of pride mistaken for heritage. Eleanor stood, trembling. "You think I'm the enemy? I've kept this town standing while you all watched it fade." Jonah stepped closer, his voice low but carrying. You've kept it from changing. And when you stop change, you stop life. Her eyes glistened, fury fighting tears. You don't understand what it's like to watch everything you love disappear. Jonah hesitated, then spoke words he hadn't meant to share. I do. The room quieted. He drew a breath. I served in places where whole towns vanished overnight, where silence meant survival, and change came only after loss too heavy to name. I came here because I thought peace lived in stillness. But I was wrong. Peace lives in truth. The words hung like mist over the harbor. Eleanor's hands fell to her sides. The council sat motionless, their authority cracking under the weight of revelation. Gregory cleared his throat, voice unsteady. The council will reconsider the ordinances. Effective immediately, enforcement is suspended pending review. A wave of murmurs rose. Eleanor's head bowed. For the first time, she looked small beneath the carved beams. Jonah turned toward the benches. This town has a choice. We can guard the past until it rots, or we can build something worth inheriting. Applause began softly, from Eli, the boy near the door, then spread like a tide. Eleanor stumbled back from the table. Her eyes found Jonah's again. You've undone everything, she whispered. He shook his head. No, I've only turned on the light. She rushed past him, coat brushing his sleeve, and fled into the hall's echoing corridor. Mara stepped to Jonah's side. You realize you've just set fire to the council's walls. Sometimes you need light to see what's buried, he said. They stepped outside into the wind. The crowd spilled after them, voices alive with argument, hope, disbelief. Across the harbor, bells from the chapel tower rang noon. Jonah paused on the steps. For a fleeting moment he thought of the past, the faces he couldn't save, the silence he'd carried across oceans. Maybe Gray Harbor wasn't his refuge after all. Maybe it was his reckoning. Mara's phone buzzed. She frowned. Sheriff wants us at the docks. Something's happened. What? She looked up, eyes shadowed. Boat came in before dawn. Crew found a duffel full of council documents, letters, payments, sealed fines. Looks like someone was hiding more than tradition. Jonah's breath caught. Eleanor? Mara pocketed the phone. We'll see soon enough. He looked back at the hall, where the door still swayed from her exit. The tide was turning faster than anyone expected, and truth, once unearthed, was never content to stay still. They headed toward the docks, footsteps echoing through streets no longer silent. Above, gulls circled, their cries sharp as warnings. Gray Harbor had begun to wake. But some awakenings come with storms. And in the shifting wind, Jonah felt it rising. A reckoning not yet done. A truth not yet spoken. The tide pulled back, gathering its strength. The next wave would not be gentle. The wind sharpened as they neared the docks, salt biting at their faces. The sea, once steady, churned restless against the pilings, like something beneath wanted out. Mara's boots struck the planks with clipped precision. Jonah followed, his coat snapping behind him, eyes fixed on the patrol cruiser parked beside a weather-worn trawler. The name painted on its hull, Seraphine, peeled under years of salt. Sheriff Darnell Pike waited by the open hold. His broad shoulders were hunched against the wind, his expression grim. A pair of deputies hovered nearby, gloves slick with seawater and something darker. Fear. Tell me what you found, Mara said. Pike nodded toward a tarp. Beneath it lay a duffel bag, soaked and torn, its zipper half open. Inside, papers swelled with moisture, ink bleeding like bruises. Jonah knelt, careful fingers peeling one sheet free. He recognized the seal of the Gray Harbor Heritage Council, embossed gold now warped by sea. Fines, property orders, confiscation notices. Some marked confidential, but it was the envelope at the bottom that froze him. Thicker stock, handwritten, no seal. He opened it. Inside, photocopies of bank transfers, dates stretching back a decade, payments made to offshore accounts, signatures, E. Vale and G. Shaw. Jonah looked up. They weren't just enforcing rules, they were selling them. Mara's face tightened. Bribes? Kickbacks. Fines rewritten for cash. He held up the damp sheets. They buried it all in paper and called it heritage. Pike exhaled through his teeth. We'll need full forensics. But this is bad. Jonah's gaze drifted toward the horizon, where fog rolled in again, pale and heavy. Water hides what we throw away, he murmured, but not forever. Mara crouched beside him. Why dump it now? Someone panicked, Jonah said. Maybe after yesterday. The sheriff straightened. We'll secure the evidence, question the council members. But Jonah's thoughts had already drifted. Eleanor fleeing the hall, her face cracked with something deeper than guilt. He rose, the papers trembling in his hands. She didn't act alone, but she might be the one breaking first. Mara watched him carefully. You plan to talk to her? He nodded. Not as a witness, as someone who knows what silence costs. The sheriff frowned. You sure she'll talk? Jonah's eyes darkened. Everyone talks. Eventually. By afternoon, the town felt different, like breath held too long. Word of the dock discovery seeped through the streets. In the diner, whispers curled like smoke. In the chapel, prayers bent toward questions. Jonah walked alone through the harbor lanes, past the weathered statues and faded murals celebrating a history now stained. He found Eleanor's house near the cliffs, a Victorian shell of white trim and shuttered windows, curtains drawn tight, gate locked. But the door opened before he knocked. She stood framed in the shadowed hallway, eyes hollow, coat still buttoned as if she hadn't slept. I thought you'd come, she said. Jonah stepped inside. The air smelled of salt and paper, pages burning low in the fireplace. Destroying evidence won't change truth, he said softly. Eleanor's hands trembled. It was supposed to be preservation. Donations, adjustments, nothing harmful. But it grew. The others, they saw profit where I saw purpose. Jonah's voice stayed low, steady. And you followed. Tears glistened on her lashes. At first I believed it was necessary, that the ends justified the means. We saved houses, restored facades. No one asked what it cost. He studied her face, the cracks where certainty had lived. You built a shrine to history and buried your conscience under it. She turned toward the window, staring out at the gray swell below. You think confession will save me? No, Jonah said, but silence will finish you. Her shoulders shook once, then stilled. They'll turn on me. Gregory, the others. They'll say I forged everything. Jonah stepped closer. Then tell the truth before they do. She faced him, eyes raw. Why do you care? You could leave. Let this town drown in its own lies. He hesitated. The words rose unbidden, pulled from a place he rarely touched. Because I've seen what happens when people stop speaking, he said. I watched villages disappear under regimes that called silence safety. I carried the dead who believed obedience would save them. I came here to forget. But Gray Harbor reminds me, every lie left unspoken builds another grave. The room went quiet except for the crackle of paper in flame. Eleanor's lips parted in a soundless breath. Then maybe it's time to dig them up. Jonah nodded once. Come with me. Tell the sheriff everything. She shook her head slowly. Not yet. There's more. Documents hidden in the lighthouse archives. Contracts. Lists of properties sold under false pretenses. His pulse quickened. Why tell me now? Because you're not from here, she whispered. You still believe truth can survive this town? She reached into her coat, drew out a brass key etched with the council's crest. The archives are locked. Only this opens them. Jonah took it, the metal cold against his palm. Their eyes met, hers full of regret, his shadowed by resolve. Be careful, she said. The others won't stay quiet. He turned to go, but paused at the threshold. Neither will I. Outside, dusk settled over Gray Harbor like a held breath. The wind carried the scent of rain and old secrets. Jonah gripped the key tight, its weight a promise. The lighthouse stood at the edge of the world, a black silhouette against a bruised sky. Once a beacon, now a vault. He started toward it, boots crunching over wet stone. Behind him, Eleanor watched from the window, small, trembling, framed by the fire's glow. In the distance, thunder rolled low, like the growl of something waking. Jonah's pace quickened. Each step felt heavier, pulled by the gravity of what waited inside those walls. Truth inked in ledgers, buried in dust, whispering to be found. Above, the light turned once across the harbor, a slow, searching sweep. And for the first time, Jonah felt it. Not just reckoning. Destiny. The sea roared against the cliffs, and the key burned cold in his hand. The storm was coming, and the lighthouse was calling. The path to the lighthouse twisted along the cliffs, slick with sea mist and shadow. The wind howled through the crags, scattering gull cries into the dark. Above, the tower loomed, its lantern dimmed to a dull heartbeat against a storm-smeared sky. Jonah Crest gripped the brass key in his pocket, the cold metal pressed against his palm like a pulse. The town lay far behind him now, a scatter of flickering windows clinging to the shore. Ahead, the lighthouse waited, ancient, patient, and heavy with memory. He paused at the door, weathered oak swollen from years of salt. The crest on the key fit perfectly into the iron lock. A slow turn. A heavy click. The hinges groaned as the door swung open. The air inside smelled of rust, oil, and damp paper. Shadows stretched long across stone walls lined with shelves. Files sat stacked in uneven towers, tied with twine, edges curled like old leaves. Dust rose with every step, stirred by a presence the building had long forgotten. Jonah closed the door behind him. The sound echoed like a seal on fate. He moved deeper, following the spiral of a narrow staircase that descended below the main chamber. The light above faded, replaced by the faint flicker of a single bulb swinging from the ceiling. At the base of the stairs, he found the archives, a room carved into the rock, half buried in the cliff itself. Wooden crates, metal cabinets, ledgers bound in cracked leather, and on the far wall, a desk with the council's seal burned into its surface. He set down his flashlight and opened the first cabinet. Records of property transfers, restoration budgets, receipts written in neat, practiced hands. But beneath the surface, a pattern. Fines dismissed for certain names, donations reappearing as anonymous endowments, pages marked with Eleanor Vale's signature, and Gregory Shaw's beside it. He flipped through folder after folder, piecing together a web of deceit that stretched years back. Money funneled through shell organizations. Town lots quietly sold to developers under false preservation clauses. Names buried in footnotes. And then, he found it. A ledger bound in black, tucked beneath a stack of routine minutes. Inside, a list titled, Acquisitions, Confidential. Jonah's breath slowed as he read. Each entry listed a property, an address, a reason for forfeiture. Beneath each, a payment amount, and a recipient code. But one name wasn't coded. Ward E. Failure to comply. Payment undisclosed. Jonah's hand froze. Ward. His mother's maiden name. He read again, disbelief coiling into realization. The house she'd lost, years ago, when he was a child, before he'd enlisted, before the deserts and the ghosts. She'd told him the bank had taken it, that the town had claimed it for back taxes, but here, in faded ink, was the truth. The Heritage Council had seized it. Sold it. Profited. His throat tightened. The room seemed to tilt, the air thick with betrayal. This wasn't just corruption. It was personal. He gripped the ledger, knuckles whitening. The storm outside pounded the walls, wind moaning through the tower's ribs. Water lashed the windows like fists. A voice broke the silence. "You shouldn't be here." Jonah spun, flashlight cutting across the room. Gregory Shaw stood in the doorway, rain slicking his coat, eyes glinting with something between fear and fury. "How did you find me?" Jonah asked, voice low. "You think Eleanor's the only one who cracks?" Gregory stepped forward, boots echoing. "She told me what she gave you. The key. The plan." "You buried the town under lies," Jonah said. "You sold people's homes, took their lives apart." Gregory's jaw clenched. "We preserved what mattered. The rest was collateral." "People aren't collateral." Gregory's hand slid into his coat. The glint of metal flashed. Jonah tensed. But instead of a weapon, Gregory pulled out another ledger, smaller, bound in red. He tossed it onto the desk. "You think you've seen the worst?" Gregory's voice cracked. "This town runs on old debts. You pull one thread, it all unravels." Jonah opened the book. Inside, names, not of properties, but of people. Payments. Silence bought and sold. Even officials, deputies, judges. "How deep does it go?" Jonah asked. Gregory's eyes flickered to the storm-lashed window. "Deeper than you can dig." "Then I'll drown before I stop." Gregory's breath shook. "You don't understand. They'll destroy you too." Jonah closed the book. "Let them try." A crack of thunder split the air. The bulb above flickered, then died. Darkness swallowed the room, broken only by Jonah's flashlight beam slicing through dust. When the light steadied again, Gregory was gone. The outer door slammed above, echoing through the tower. Jonah stood alone, the ledgers heavy in his hands. Wind howled through unseen cracks. Somewhere distant, a wave smashed against the cliff with the sound of finality. He stared at the names, the signatures, the evidence soaked in greed and memory, and at the one line that burned through every other, Ward E. The truth pressed against his chest like a stone. This fight had never just been about Gray Harbor. It was about every silence he'd ever carried, every injustice buried beneath tradition, every wound disguised as heritage. He gathered the ledgers, wrapped them in his coat, and climbed the stairs into the storm. Outside, rain slashed sideways, drenching him in seconds. The beacon overhead spun its weak light across the waves, a single eye refusing to close. Jonah turned toward town, heart pounding, mind alight. They thought the sea could keep their secrets, but the tide was rising, and it carried his name. Lightning flashed, illuminating the cliffs, the winding path, and far below, the restless water clawing at the rocks like truth demanding release. He started walking, each step heavier, faster. Behind him, the lighthouse groaned in the wind. Ahead, Gray Harbor waited, unready for what was coming. Jonah's eyes narrowed against the rain. The silence was ending, and with it, the town's illusion of peace. The storm had arrived. Rain fell in sheets, hammering rooftops, hissing against stone. Gray Harbor blurred beneath the storm. Its narrow streets turned to rivers of reflection, past and present flowing side by side. Jonah Crest moved through it like a shadow with purpose, soaked to the bone, the ledgers clutched under his arm. The brass key lay cold in his pocket, its duty done. Thunder rolled overhead, heavy as judgment. By the time he reached the town hall, lights burned behind every window. Figures pressed against the glass, faces pale with curiosity and fear. The door swung open before he could knock. Deputy Mara Keene stood there, rain streaking her hair. Her eyes widened at the sight of him, drenched, breath steady, resolve carved into his face. "You found something," she said. He held up the ledgers. "Everything. The council's theft, the bribes, and the name they stole from me." She stepped aside. "Then let's end it." Inside, the hall throbbed with voices. Townspeople gathered in defiance of the storm, huddled in pew-like rows. Eleanor Vale sat apart near the front, hands clasped tight, eyes fixed on the floor. Gregory Shaw stood behind the council table, whispering to the remaining members, his face a mask of brittle calm. Jonah walked straight to the center aisle, water dripping from his coat, the silence spreading behind him like a wake. When he reached the front, he placed the ledgers on the table with a heavy thud. "Gray Harbor," he said, voice carrying over the roar outside. "You've been living under a lie." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. These books hold every buried truth. The council seized properties under false pretenses, funneled money through hidden accounts, sold heritage to the highest bidder. He turned, eyes sweeping the room. They called it preservation. It was theft. Gregory stepped forward, voice rising above the storm. "You have no proof those signatures are authentic." Jonah opened the black ledger, flipping to the page that had carved a scar across his chest. He pointed. "Then tell me, Mr. Shaw, is this not your name beside Eleanor's? Payments signed, transfers hidden." The crowd leaned in, breath caught. Gregory's face went pale. "You don't understand the pressure." "Pressure doesn't justify betrayal," Jonah said. "You bled this town under the banner of tradition. You took what wasn't yours, homes, lives, dignity." Eleanor rose, trembling. "He's telling the truth." Her voice cracked, then steadied. "We thought we were saving Gray Harbor, but we were saving ourselves. I let fear of change turn into greed." The room gasped. Someone shouted, "You lied to us!" Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, and I'll answer for it." Jonah turned to the crowd. "So will they all. But this isn't just their sin. It's ours. Every silence that allowed it. Every neighbor who saw injustice and looked away." The storm outside swelled, wind howling through the rafters, rain rattling the windows like a chorus of ghosts. Lightning flashed, casting the hall in white fire. Jonah's voice rose with it. "You built your peace on silence. But silence is never peace. It's surrender." A fisherman near the back stood. "What do we do now?" Jonah's gaze softened. "We speak. We rebuild. We choose truth over comfort." Mara stepped beside him, hand resting on her belt. "The sheriff's office will seize these ledgers. An investigation starts tonight. Anyone complicit will face charges." Gregory slumped into a chair, head in his hands. Eleanor stayed standing, eyes closed, as though finally ready to face the storm. But the murmurs in the hall weren't just anger. They carried relief. The kind that comes when rot is finally cut away. Jonah felt it too, the fragile light breaking through clouds of deceit. Then a voice rose from near the door. Eli, the boy with the phone, stepped forward, clutching his soaked hoodie. "Mr. Crest, the video. It's everywhere. People from other towns, reporters. They're coming. The world's watching. Jonah's heart clenched. He hadn't wanted fame, only truth. But truth, once loosed, doesn't ask permission. He met the boy's eyes. Good. Let them see what power looks like when it hides behind kindness. The boy nodded, proud and scared all at once. A crack of thunder shook the walls. The lights flickered, then steadied. Outside, the wind screamed like a warning, or a blessing. Eleanor stepped closer to Jonah, voice trembling. You said the tide never stops. That truth always returns. I didn't believe you. He looked at her, not with forgiveness yet, but understanding. Now you do. Tears cut clean paths down her face. I'll testify. Every name. Every account. Mara placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. That's the right start. Jonah turned back to the crowd. This town's not beyond saving, but it has to earn what it claims to protect. The silence that followed wasn't empty this time. It was waiting, listening, breathing. He exhaled slowly, the weight of years loosening in his chest. For the first time, he felt not like an outsider, but a mirror, showing Gray Harbor what it truly was. But even mirrors can crack. Through the window he glimpsed movement, a figure in the rain across the square, watching. Tall, still, face hidden beneath a hood. Gregory followed his gaze, went rigid. Jonah whispered, "Who is that?" Gregory's voice broke. Not everyone wanted this truth to surface. Mara turned, hand instinctively moving toward her radio. Lightning flashed again, and the figure was gone. The hall buzzed with uneasy voices, but Jonah's mind had already shifted. If the council's crimes reached beyond Gray Harbor, the fight was far from over. He looked down at the ledgers, black and red, soaked with rain and revelation. The storm outside began to fade, its rage spent. But in its wake, a new silence settled. Not surrender, but suspense. Eleanor sat heavily on the bench, eyes closed. Gregory stared at the floor. Mara began securing the evidence. The townsfolk whispered among themselves, voices blending into a fragile chorus of hope and fear. Jonah walked to the door, hand on the frame, eyes scanning the street beyond. The rain slowed, leaving the air heavy with salt and promise. He could still feel the unseen watcher's presence, lingering in the edges of the fog. This was not the end, just the eye of the storm. He stepped outside, coat clinging, hair plastered to his temples, the taste of iron and salt on his lips. Behind him, the hall glowed warm against the night, a house of reckoning. Ahead, the sea whispered like a prophet. Jonah's jaw tightened. Truth had risen, but justice was still coming, and it would not be gentle. Morning rose gray and heavy over Gray Harbor. The storm had broken, but the air still carried its echo. Damp streets glimmering like old scars, the sea restless against the rocks. Jonah Crest stood at the edge of the pier, coat draped over his shoulders, eyes on the horizon. In his hands, the ledgers were sealed in a waterproof case, bound for the sheriff's office. But even with the truth in his grasp, he felt no victory, only the weight of what came next. Behind him, footsteps. Deputy Mara Keene approached, hands buried in her jacket pockets. Her face held the same stormlight calm she'd worn through every trial. "They've booked Gregory," she said quietly. Eleanor turned herself in at dawn. She gave a full statement. Jonah nodded, gaze still fixed on the sea. She chose to speak before silence finished her. Mara studied him a moment. "You don't look relieved." He shook his head. "Because this wasn't just them. It's the town. It's the way people worship quiet and call it peace." She followed his eyes toward the water, where gulls wheeled over the foam. You think it can change? Jonah's answer came slow. Change doesn't come clean. It drags what's buried back into the light. A gust of wind swept past, carrying the scent of brine and something faint. Smoke. Mara turned, frowning. Do you smell that? They followed it through the narrow streets, past shuttered shops and waterlogged fences, until they reached the old chapel on Main. The front door hung ajar, hinges scorched. Inside, smoke curled from a pile of burning papers on the altar. Jonah rushed forward, stamping out the flames with his boots. He snatched the half-charred sheets, eyes scanning the inked lines, council correspondence, payment logs, names not yet recorded. Evidence. Someone had tried to erase the final traces. A shadow stirred behind the pews. Jonah turned, muscles tightening. A man stepped into the pale light, tall, hooded, the same figure Jonah had seen through the rain the night before. He pulled back the hood. Sheriff Darnell Pike. Mara's breath caught. Sheriff? His eyes were hollow, rimmed with sleeplessness. You should have stopped digging. Jonah's voice was calm, cold. It was you. Pike's jaw tightened. I kept order, made deals to keep this town alive. You think truth feeds families, pays bills? Order needs compromise. You sold justice for stability, Jonah said, and called it leadership. Pike took a step closer. You don't understand this place. You're not one of us. Jonah met his gaze. That's why I saw what you wouldn't. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Outside, the sea roared like a witness. Mara's hand hovered near her weapon, voice steady. Sheriff, it's over. Put down whatever's left. Pike exhaled, eyes flicking to the burnt papers. Maybe it is. He reached into his coat, slow, deliberate, and drew out a folded envelope. He tossed it to Jonah. Inside lay a letter, dated 10 years ago, signed by the council, and Pike's name beneath. It authorized the seizure of E. Ward's property, Jonah's mother, for heritage realignment. Jonah's hands trembled around the paper. You took her home. Pike's voice cracked. She wouldn't sign the deed. Said the land belonged to her husband's memory. The council pushed. I made it happen. Mara stepped between them. You'll answer for it now. Pike's eyes lifted, tired, unflinching. Maybe I already am. He turned toward the door. Rain began again, soft, cleansing. He walked out into it without another word. Jonah stood frozen, letter trembling in his hand. Every wound he'd buried surged up. The childhood eviction, his mother's tears, the silence he'd carried across continents. Mara's voice came quiet. You finally know. He looked at her, eyes dark with both grief and clarity. Knowing isn't peace. She nodded. But it's the beginning. He folded the letter, slid it into the case with the ledgers, sealing the past in truth instead of lies. Together they walked to the courthouse. The townspeople watched from porches and windows, eyes no longer cold, but searching. Inside, reporters clustered like gulls, questions swirling. Jonah said nothing. He handed the evidence to the clerk and turned away. Outside, the storm had eased to a mist. The harbor smelled clean again. Eleanor waited near the steps, wrists unshackled, guarded by a single deputy. She looked smaller now, but lighter too. I saw him, she said softly. Pike. Jonah nodded. He confessed. Tears welled in her eyes. Maybe now the town can breathe. He studied her face, weary, sincere. Redemption's not forgiveness. It's the work after. She nodded, voice trembling. Then I'll do the work. Jonah turned toward the sea. The horizon had cleared, the first break of sunlight glinting off the waves. Eli ran up, breathless, clutching his phone. "Mr. Crest, they're calling you a hero. The story's everywhere." Jonah's gaze softened. "I'm no hero, Eli. I just stopped being quiet." The boy smiled faintly. "That's what heroes do." Jonah looked down the street. The town washed clean, not yet whole, but awake. The gulls wheeled high above, crying into the wind. He felt the weight of the letter in his pocket, the ache of what could never be returned. But beneath it, something steady. Not peace, but purpose. He turned back to Mara. "You'll stay?" She nodded. "Someone has to build what comes next." He offered a faint smile. "Then Gray Harbor's in good hands." She tilted her head. "And you?" Jonah looked once more at the sea. "I've carried silence long enough. Time to see where the truth leads." He started down the pier, boots echoing on wet wood, the wind at his back. Behind him, the town began to stir. Doors opening, voices rising, a community learning how to speak again. Ahead, the horizon widened, endless, waiting. The tide rolled in, washing the pier clean. Jonah paused at the edge, eyes closed, breathing in the salt and sound. For the first time, he didn't feel like a ghost. He felt alive. A gull soared overhead, its shadow crossing the water like a promise. Jonah turned toward the light breaking over the waves, soft, certain, unstoppable. The silence was gone. The truth remained. And the tide, as always, returned.